Welcome to Business Leader Breakthroughs, where we help unlock the potential in you, your teams, and your business. I'm your host, Ryan Castle, along with Dr. Mike Ashby. We'll share insights, experiences, and stories on achieving breakthrough success in business and life. To learn more, click the link in the episode show notes or go to thebreakthrough.co. Now let the breakthroughs begin. Mike, what comes before marriage?
Oh, that is such a big question, isn't it?
It is. But if we were talking in the traditional sense, what comes before marriage?
Prenup? Oh, not that traditional.
Is that traditional?
No,
I think
that's not
that's
traditional.
sort of slightly new age, isn't it? Prenups?
Yeah.
I'm a bit old school on those things. I'm like, jump on in, have it all, let's go.
Proposal.
After proposal but before marriage?
Is that the topic of this webinar?
It is.
Engagement.
That was painfully brutal, and maybe I should have briefed you on my sort of attempt at introducing a topic before we got started. But engagement is our topic of the podcast today, something that is well talked about in the leadership space and in culture and in organisations. And the question of the day really is it worth measuring engagement?
Yeah, it's been one of those things that, at some level it's pretty obvious that engagement's important. It becomes a phrase that gets picked up. I don't know, it's probably 10, 15 years maybe, but maybe a bit more. And certain authors have been quite prolific around it, and then the programs follow and all of that kind of stuff. I think, like most of these things, they have some value in the first little while because it gets you to think about things a bit differently. But over time, it just becomes a bit kind of a bit overexposed. The problem I have with engagement is actually that engagement doesn't necessarily measure effort or anything else.
No.
Actually, it just measures how engaged is this person with the organisation, with their work, and stuff like that. Doesn't measure whether they're doing a good job, doesn't measure whether they are doing anything for the organisation, actually. So we talked about this when we talked about contribution. I prefer the idea of thinking about contribution from the organisation to the person, from the person to the organisation. Engagement's a bit one way. Just because they're engaged doesn't mean they're going to do a great job.
Yeah, and I think how you measure engagement, you could go out and ask 1,000 leaders for their definition of engagement. You'd probably get 900 different responses.
Yeah.
And then at what level do you measure engagement? Do you need to do it across the entire organisation? Are you measuring engagement at a single score? How engaged do you feel at this organisation? Rate us on a 1 to 10. Or do you dive into the some organisations do the 200 question survey to try and figure out engagement. I think there's different aspects of value for different organisations in different approaches. The fundamental value that I'm certain of is having a conversation with your people about what's going on for them, what's going on for them with their teams, and what's going on for them as a part of this organisation. That's really valuable. Now, do you get deep insight to that when you get a single measure of engagement as a percentage engaged? No, I don't think so.
No, and do you remember the conversation we had with that guy who talked about these engagement surveys were coming back and it was all glorious, and he's thinking, this is not the conversation I had with that person. Not at all.
Yeah.
So I think there's real issues about how those engagement surveys work and the answers they produce and the false positives effectively. And like I say, they don't reflect the nature of the relationship between the organisation. What is the organisation getting back, even from an engaged individual? So to me, it's a tool in the employee motivation space.
I worked at a reasonably large corporate in New Zealand, and if anyone wanted to look at my LinkedIn profile, they probably wouldn't have too much trouble to work that out. But there was a engagement survey done annually, and just so happens that contribution of bonus was partly attached to engagement score.
Oh, really?
So you can imagine the, shall we call them, pep talks that were discussed sort of in the week of engagement survey, going, look guys, if we appear to be very engaged here, the portion of bonus that comes to our part of the organisation that then gets distributed amongst you, the people filling in the engagement score, is somewhat connected. We had very good engagement scores.
Very good engagement,
Yes. Was the conversation with people in the hallways possibly a little bit different to that engagement score?
A little bit cynical, perhaps?
On occasion, it was.
It's often said that you get what you measure, but in that case, that might be an exception.
Yes. Yeah.
It measured well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't
Well,
follow.
if you were measuring engagement to get bonus, then it worked really
yes.
well. It worked really well.
Follow the incentives.
So yeah, I think you've got to be careful about what you measure, how you measure it. I do appreciate some work that an author and researcher, Marcus Buckingham, has done.
Yep.
He's done that in coordination with the ADP Research Institute. They've looked at 19,000 people globally and looked at what actually affects engagement. So not just how do you measure it, but if you're going to measure it, what do you then look at? And he came up with a 8-question framework.
Yep.
I like it because they're actually insights that you can then go and do something about. So that's a value. It's something we've just run in our own organisation.
We have.
And the big points around it are, once you measure it, feed it back to your team. And we've done a leadership review of that, and then we're going to share the results with our whole team on Monday. So I think feedback, because there's nothing worse than being someone who gets asked to fill in any kind of survey, research, feedback, and then you never hear anything. So if you're going to ask people in your organisation about feedback, then make sure you feed it back. You know, if kind of where that, good, bad, or ugly, I think you need to be upfront and honest as leaders about where that goes. The value for us was not around our scores and look purely on paper and looking at benchmarks. Our scores are great.
Of course.
No, not of course.
Oh.
You know, because we ran it completely. We ran it anonymously. We did it with structure. Our bonuses are not connected to that. Although, can I talk about no? So you know, it was done in the right format. So the scores that came back were authentic.
Yeah.
And they are good because we benchmark other organisations we work with. We've looked at the ADP research and they're good. But the value is not for us to look at it and go, yes, we got good scores. The value is the conversations we had as a leadership team about the conversation went a lot broader than engagement, but it was connected, right? And there was huge value in us taking the time as a leadership team to discuss that. And then I think the next level that really adds value is when you then bring that conversation back to a one-on-one.
Yeah, back to the individual.
Individual and go, hey, this is what as a company we saw, this was kind of the feedbacks, how does that connect for you? Look, our area that we had the lower score on was one of the questions around, are you clear on your expectations at work? And we, comparatively to other scores, scored lower on that. So that's a great conversation for us to have with our team members to go around that expectation. What are we not making clear? How could we communicate better on that? What would it mean to be clear on that? So again, getting the results is one thing. The conversations that it leads to are better.
Yeah. And look, if you go back to, what does engagement even tell you? It actually doesn't tell you a whole lot about performance, but it does tell you a lot about how your people are sitting with the organisation. And some important dimensions around, the Buckingham work around what affects that. So, one of the areas that we looked at and talked about was training and leadership. Training in particular, what training and support do you need from us? And actually one of the interesting conversations that came out of that process was for you and I.
Absolutely.
Talking about, well, how do you and I actually keep ourselves engaged and on our own development path? And it's always quite a challenge to think about it like that. But that's anything that leads to a better question is a good thing.
Yeah.
And so an engagement survey in that context is very much about leading to a better conversation, a higher quality conversation. Might not be about engagement, because I hope you're engaged.
Very.
Good.
I'm married.
Well, we both are in that sense, aren't we?
Oh, you're not supposed to say that with the...
No, I mean, we're locked.
If Francesca listens to this, you're in trouble.
No, well, in the sense of with the company, married to the company, aren't we?
Yes, right.
Yes.
Right.
And it's a joyous thing, isn't it?
It is.
It is.
And on that insight around Marcus Buckingham and the research that he's done, another bit that really stood out for me is that his insight was people experience their engagement, their culture in the kind of 5, 6, 10 people that they work with every single day. Now, we are a smaller organisation, so we can be connected with virtually our whole team. In an organisation of 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 people, most people in the organisation don't experience culture or engagement with the CEO. It just doesn't happen. But they do experience culture with their immediate manager. They experience it with their co-workers, and we experience it with the people that other departments that we do cross-project work, etc. on. And it's part of why we're so big on giving frontline and operational leaders the skills, the capabilities, the tools, the frameworks for them to be able to lead culture and engagement within their team, because that's where you experience it. You don't experience it as one of 1,000 people. You experience it as a member of my team.
Yeah, we've talked about this. It's a great point. Culture actually lives on the workshop floor. That's where it sits. That's where you want it to kind of thrive and be great, because they're the people doing the work. So leaders in particular can model culture, and they can even talk about culture, but they can't make it happen because they're too far away. It is actually mediated through all those layers. To get to the shop floor means it's going to be the people who manage the shop floor and their managers. So there's a long way sometimes between that kind of, here's my vision for the culture, and it's this and that, and it's fully enabled, and da-da-la.
The values poster on the wall?
That's the one. And actually culture comes from being demonstrated and lived on the floor. And I'm just thinking about this. I'm just writing a blog at the moment talking about kind of old models of learning. So the only point to learning in a workplace is change.
Yes.
Learning without change is a waste of time. And so many models of change and learning, for that matter, are just outdated. And they're all based on kind of push from the top down. You kind of press transmit, and this message goes out, 470 times, and at some point somebody gets the message.
Maybe.
Probably not actually. Well, they don't, because they don't have to do the work. Whereas what we're talking about when we talk about engagement, and we talk about it at the shop floor, is people working out for themselves what culture looks like in their space. So you can say what you like, and you can put as many pretty posters on the wall about the values, etc. What actually is the culture of your organisation is dictated by the experience of the people on the shop floor of each other and of their manager, primarily. That's where it sits. It's very local, isn't it?
It is. So when we tree up a 1,000-person engagement survey response to a single number for the whole organisation, my view is very, very little value. When you get a view of it in a immediate team, and then follow those scores or survey feedback with direct conversations with the team and the individuals, potential for huge value. And the gold is really in the detail. It's not in that kind of macroed up number. Boards like that number, but boards don't like to know too much. No.
It's not uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. So look, interested to hear your views on engagement. We know there are people that are massive proponents of it, live and die almost by their engagement scores. Others we've come across who fall very much in the camp of, we think that's a waste of time. And we're open to all those views. We're actually interested in running a session with some people that are proponents of both those views. So if you feel strongly about this and are open to sharing your insights with the wider community, we'd love to hear from you. We might put together a session just to discuss and debate that one out a bit more.
Sounds like fun.
Thanks for joining us today, team. Bye-bye.
See you later.